Hey guys, what's up? What's good? It's your girl dammydayss back again with another video. Time is one of our most valuable resources. It's one of our most valuable assets that once it's gone, is gone. You can't really ever get it back. You can't buy time back that has been lost. Yet, so many of us just allow it to slip away like it's something that we can recreate. We can never ever get time back. So how do we make better use of our time? Keep watching and I'll share a few of my tips. I don't know if it's just me or if it's everybody, but personally, I tend to naturally sit in my car when I get to my destination or even before I leave. Actually, not more so before I leave, because most of the time I'm having to like get there at a certain time. But when I don't have like a rush or anywhere to go to, if I'm not careful, I find myself just sitting in my car scrolling. If you're one of those people, just, identify in the comment section below. That is such a time waster because obviously most of the time, unless you're doing something productive, it's probably just scrolling through social media and nothing productive. So I try to be more aware of the time I spend in my car. I just tell myself, Dami, we're getting to the car, we're moving, we're getting into the car, we're getting wherever we're going to, and we're getting right out the car. Like, I don't always have to have something to push me out of the car to get out. So if you find yourself spending an extra 5 minutes, sometimes I'll spend a good extra 20 minutes in my car just sitting. Like, I'm sure back in the day it was pretty bad, like especially when it's cold and I'm trying to avoid the weather. I'm just like, you know what, I'd rather sit in the warmth of this car. Like, why do I need to go outside? But that takes up time, and most of the time, like I said, because we're not doing anything productive, it's just wasted time. However, how do you make time in your car more productive? Firstly, leave. Like, let's move on to the next thing. We don't need to sit in the car. I find, for example, whilst driving, I love listening to a good jam. I love a good music. But if I've got a long commute, I would rather put on an audiobook or put on a podcast or put on a sermon and listen to that whilst driving. I can gain back time in those minutes. Or if I want to just absorb a bit more of that after I've stopped driving, then I can do that whilst chilling in the car. But I have to pay attention. I can't also be using my phone. Trying to reduce that time and just making yourself a bit more aware that you need to leave the car. Another thing I was hoping to try, I assume that maybe setting an alarm for when you're meant to reach your next destination would actually be a good reminder if I've not been able to control myself. So if it's going to be an estimated journey of 15 minutes, then I'm going to put 6:15 alarm ring so that I know, hey, you need to get it moving. Number 2, generally just using wait times more wisely. We have a lot of wait times in our day-to-day activities that we may not actually realize, whether that's at the doctor's, waiting on an appointment, or any appointment. The wait time, you take your car to the mechanic, obviously commuting, if you're taking public transport between the train, the bus, wherever, you're probably going to sit for a few minutes or even hours for some, just trying to get to your next destination. Downtime at work is also another one. Time in the toilet. All of these things are little wait times that are inserted throughout our day. Because we kind of aren't thinking about it, we just kind of do the most idle thing. But being able to catch those idle times and use that for something else. So if you have an ebook on your phone, you can scroll through that instead, or read your Bible, or read a book if you are like revising or whatever the case may be, or listen to an audiobook in that time. Fill up that time with something else other than the time being gone. Sounds like it's little or it's too small and it's probably insignificant, but if you think about it, this is infused into our day-to-day, our week-on-week, our month-on-month. So all of those times does accumulate. So if you're more conscious of those down times and grab it whilst you are, you'd be making better use of that time rather than just leaving it idle. Another type of time that also can go without you realizing is actually like your chore time. So the time that you use to clean, the times that you use to cook, you don't realize how much time you spend doing that unless you outsource it to somebody else, but it can take a lot of time. So during those times, I actually personally find that I don't enjoy music as much when I'm doing chores or when I'm cooking. I prefer actually listening to something. Most of the time I listen to a sermon or like a podcast, but I just prefer someone talking than me. I can listen to music for a few minutes and then most of the time I'll swap it over. I think I've just gradually like trained myself to enjoy that more, because before I'm going to spend an hour doing this, 2 hours doing this, so I just need to like jam to music. But music is not really going to help my life. For a few minutes I can jam, feel good, but if I listen to something, I am able to obviously come up with better tips on how to live my life. Most people ask me, how do I consume a lot of long content? It's usually during that time for me. Those times are pretty paramount. If I'm cooking, if I'm cleaning, if I'm just doing something around the house, I just leave something playing, and that's how I tend to kind of consume a lot of content and videos and podcasts. Plan everything. I actually don't think I'm much of a planner, but when I speak to some of my friends, I'm like, actually, maybe I've kind of learned to be over time. It really, really does help me, and I think I still have so much more I want to develop in when it comes to planning. I was speaking to someone the other day, and they were talking about how they were planning on something for the group, and I was like, oh, this date will be good just because this is not there, that's not there. And they're like, how do you know that? I'm like, yeah, like, I don't know, like when I think of like the whole month, like I don't know how you think, but I basically see the year as my calendar, like visually, because I write things down in my calendar. I visually am able to see like there's a gap here, but that's because I visually write it down as well. That's what I mean by planning things, because I find that before I used to just keep everything mental, and honestly I was going cray like, because most of the time I'm gonna forget. It's just so much. As you get older, you just have more commitments, and yeah, just planning things. When I mean plan everything, I mean also try and plan how you want to carry things out. Before I would just wing a video, for example, but I find now that planning a video just helps me get through it easier. Planning my shopping just helps me get through it quicker. Planning what I want to cook for the week or how the week is going to turn out, it just clears up some mental space. Try and plan the when and the how you're going to carry a task out. I think it just helps so much in saving that time that you're going to use to be contemplating, consolidating, thinking about many things. Just section the time to think about it, write it down, and when it's time to execute, you just execute. After planning the time is scheduling the time. These are two slightly different things. Planning it is about writing the how, the when, what you need to do, and all of that. The scheduling is scheduling the time. So I've talked about this in some previous videos before. Scheduling time for me is so important. Again, going back to the calendar, but this time is actually the calendar and my alarms. So being able to schedule time for when I want to do something. So I find that sometimes so many things pop into my mind at the same time, but most of the times I actually don't need to deal with it then and there. So what I do is that once it pops up in my mind, I just write it down, and most of the time I write it directly into my calendar for like the next best time I'm able to deal with this thing, because I don't really need to deal with it now. But when I just don't handle it, it's kind of like, oh, I need to do this now, I need to do that one now, but actually it's not that deep. I only actually really need to do one thing now, and these other things are just popping in. And I find that when I schedule them in for later, I kind of just tell my mind that that's sorted, and it just kind of closes that off without having to be on overdrive all the time. So try and schedule the time, set alarms for when you need to do things. It just takes away that mental thinking space, which I think takes time in trying to make a decision as to when. But usually when you deal with it as it comes and schedule time for doing it, you're just kind of showing yourself that you've taken responsibility of, you know, giving yourself another time that is better to carry out this task. And the next point is to write every thought of action. Sometimes those thoughts don't have to be scheduled into my calendar or to alarm, but I just write it down so I don't forget. So if I need to order something, if I need to talk to somebody about something, I just write it down. My note app is just for scribbling, so I just write it down or write it on paper. You just underestimate how much time it saves you thinking about what you thought about before, and now you don't remember, and then you're having to think about something new. But when your mind gave you the gift of the idea or the gift of the reminder, you didn't make use of it. So usually if a thought of action comes, I just write it down so I don't forget later, and this ultimately saves me time in increment. Another obvious one is waking up earlier. Waking up earlier and doing more with your mornings just allows you to start your day on a higher note, and inevitably allows you to make better use of your time. So usually it's when you find that you're rolling out of bed straight into work. After work you're tired, and then you sleep, and then you repeat. Time just seems like it's nowhere to be found, but really there are pockets of time that you could have grasped, and one of that is in your mornings when everything is quiet, when you are able to get one or two things done, without the hustle and bustle of the whole universe, that is a great time to capture time back, especially when you make use of your evenings to be able to sleep early and wake up early so that you have a good bulk of your time in the morning to be productive. And finally, spend the money and save time. Spend the money and save time. Spend the money and save time. This can look like having long layovers. I remember back in the day, if it takes me 2 hours or 4 hours to get to a place, I'd book a flight that's going to take like 10, 12 hours because of layover. Now, if that's the only flight, fair enough. But nowadays, thank God that we're not where we used to be. But I'd rather just pay and get my time back, because technically you're paying either way. You're sacrificing something, and most of the time we're sacrificing time. It might not even be airport layovers or traveling. It could be trying to get a deal from another store versus another store, but the store that has the deal is way further away versus this store that has a full price. But for you to get to that store, you're going to need to commute a longer distance, and you think, oh, you're getting it for cheaper. But really, if you spend the money and just buy it full price at this place, or just that tad bit more expensive at this place, you would save yourself spending time commuting or getting to this other place when really the time that you spent doesn't match up. So spend the money and save time. Now, obviously there are times where it's the other way around, where you spend time to save money if you have the time, but again, most times we don't have the time. So spend the money and save the time. A caveat to when we're talking about spending money is not to spend bad money, if that makes sense. Don't spend debt to save time, because most of the time spending debt doesn't save you time. Having bad debts just indents on your future time, because what you're doing with that bad debt is, firstly, it's not producing you any assets, it's not giving you anything back in return. All it's taking from you is more time to work to pay that back, more time to figure out something of how to pay that back in the future. If it's good debt, that's a different conversation. But if it's bad debt, it's always buying into your time. So that's where it's better to just not take out bad debts and avoid it, because what you're ultimately doing is just postponing the time that you're going to have to work back to pay that stuff, versus when you just never have the parasitic debt in the first place and it's not sucking on your time. I hope this helps us identify some of the little pockets of time that we may be letting slip through our hands. If we accumulate all of these together, we would find that, you know, we don't need all of the time in the world, but all of those little times can just help us feel that much better about us being more productive, or spending time with the people that we love, or just spending time doing the things that we actually want to do. I hope this video helps someone out there, and if you are looking for another video to watch similar to this, I would recommend watching my video on how to have a productive morning routine. But if you have any other tips on how to better save your time and use it wisely, please let us know in the comments below, and I'll be sure to read it and implement it as well for myself. But stay blessed, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in my next video.